Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi, I'm Cathy, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm very grateful to be here tonight, even though I wondered if I was. And I'm grateful, sitting here I realize how grateful I am to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is not how I felt when I came in here. I mean, when I came in here, I remember distinctly my first AA meeting and leaving it and getting on a crying jag just because this is what I've sunk to. Here I am, and now I'm so grateful. I can go anywhere. I go back to New York. I find meetings, even though I'm not really used to this particular meeting. I feel welcome, and I feel like I belong here, and that's a very wonderful feeling. My head's always going, and before I go into what it was like for me, my head started saying, "Oh, why did Don ask me to speak here?" I think, and I must have been funny that night. I shouldn't be, I have to watch that, because sometimes I'm funny and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm morbid, and speak, like sharing's fine, but speaking it's like jumping off a diving board, and I don't know, what's going to come out. But so I have to go through this whole little ritual talking to myself, and then I get clear on the program. This is where the program comes in for me. It's very simple, Cathy. All you have to do is share your experience, strength, and hope. That's your assignment. Show up, share your experience, strength, and hope, and nothing else is your business. Period. So it makes life easier. I don't know if I like it or not, but and one other little thing, too, I want to tell you a story because I was thinking of this today in connection with coming here. And I've had several home groups over my years in AAs. The first one was the Crenshaw Lano Club. And, it seems I go to a place for a few years, and then I go to another home group for a few years. And at the Crenshaw Lano Club, they used to have a thing called, what did they call it, like talent night. And it was a very warm, wonderful, big club. They had a lot of people. And this talent night, these alcoholics would come in, tuxedos and God knows what, and they'd play the piano and they'd do all sorts of things, that were, and it was very impressive, But this one woman, she was maybe like 30, very beautiful black woman, and she got up to sing. And she couldn't sing. Every time she started to sing, like her voice would crack, and she'd start to cry, and she'd say, "I can't do it." And each time the whole group would say, "Come on, you can do it." Like they didn't say, "Sit down," They stuck there for maybe, I don't know how long, saying, "Come on, you can do it, you can do it. Just start again, just do it again," until that woman sang like she was on Broadway. It was just watching the love of supporting her was remarkable, and I think that was in my mind today because I wanted you to support me. I thought, I don't want to do I have to be a comedian? Do I have to do this? Do I have to just relax, Cathy, just go. So anyway, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I was born in the Bronx to people that were born in this country, but from very poor immigrant families. One side was Irish Catholic to the hilt. That was my father. We always called him St. Joseph. And he married my mother, who was a Polish truck. That's what she was. She was like a Polish truck. And I was her target. And, you know, not too long ago, I said to one of my cousins when I went back to New York, I said, how can it be? I mean, I have God knows how many cousins on both Irish and Polish sides, and I thought, I'm the only one who's divorced, and I'm the only one who's an alcoholic. How can that be? And my cousin Nancy said, are you crazy? She said, what are you talking about? She said, you're the only one who's honest. Don't you remember Grandpa? Don't you remember Aunt Marie? Don't you remember this one, that one, you know, my Uncle Johnny? I mean, all of them, you know. The only one who didn't drink was my mother. And my mother needed a drink. I mean, I wished, in retrospect, I wish she had just gotten loaded and, you know, relax, just relax. Instead, she was mean. She was very, very mean. And it was always directed at me. And it was very confusing because I was basically a very good kid. I was a great student in school. I took the Catholic thing hook, line, and sinker. You know, I'd go to church every day. I didn't only want to be a nun. I wanted to be a saint. I'd pray on the hard floor. I'd read about all the saints who, you know, pluck out their eyeballs, and, you know, so they wouldn't look. I mean, it was really, and this was my goal in life, suffer. The more you suffer, the better you are. And let me tell you, that's taken many years in sobriety to still try to shed little by little, because in my head, poverty, suffering, all these martyrdom, they're saintly. That's what I learned. I'll go to heaven. But I guess I started drinking before I became a nun, so I forgot, or something like that, you know. I remember my first drinks, one in particular. I sipped my father's beer, which was terrible, and my father could put them away, but he was a Marine, you know, and so it just seemed he could stop. Like, he loved his drinking, was important, but he could stop. Anyway, I sipped his beer, and I thought it was, ugh, you know, then. And then my parents were always fighting. I mean, just always fighting. And when I was about 18, we used to go to this Catholic church. Where else do you go? You know, St. Helena's Catholic Church in the Bronx. And across the street from this church, what was typical in those days anyway, was there was a bar, you know, and all the people from the church would then go to the bar, even the kids, because they would serve dinner in this dingy bar, so that, you know, my father could drink and we'd have whatever they had in the bar for Sunday dinner. And I remember when I turned 18, I'm kind of skipping over my whole life there, but it's what's come to my mind. When I turned 18, my father said, would you like a drink? And right then, again, my parents started fighting. My mother, she doesn't need a drink. What does she need a drink for? She did, you know. But somehow I won, and I got a Manhattan. And I remember that, you know, when that Manhattan went down and tingled, I couldn't care less that these people were at each other's throats. Fight till the cows come home. I felt terrific. And I guess now I felt towards my mother like, you know, you know, something like she couldn't get to me. And I felt good. And I loved that drink from the get-go. What I remember in that progression was I drank a lot very quickly, and I got sick very quickly. Never. I mean, when you grow up the kind of Catholic I grew up, there were no such words like alcoholic. There were no such words like sex. You know, I thought French kissing, like, I think, what do you do it in France? Or, you know, you'd never ask anything, you know, so the idea of being an alcoholic, oh, forget it. I mean, it would never. But I drank. I can remember, like, the first things, a girlfriend of mine had a bridal shower. And I was always, too, I'd meet nice guys, and then, of course, I needed to meet people who would torture me, you know, both in AA and before AA. I'd need to meet Charlie Mansons, so I dropped the nice guys, This friend of mine was then marrying one of the guys that was too nice, And anyway, I remember getting schnockered at her bridal shower. I mean, just drunk out of my mind, drunk out of my mind. And what I remember about it is coming home, puking all over the place, and looking at it, and saying it was the cheese. It was obviously the cheese. Look at those chunks of cheese all over the, I knew it was the cheese. And that's how my drinking went, and I drank a lot. I loved to drink. I met another alcoholic, my ex-husband, who he was a hotshot medical student and a very nice guy. He went to Cornell in Manhattan. I worked there. And he was a brilliant pianist. And I played the piano too. It was hard for me to say. In fact, I was so anxious to please my mother. This pops into my mind. I was so anxious to try to please this woman that I figured I'd play Chopin, right? Polish Chopin. I play Chopin. Not only would I play Chopin, I auditioned at Juilliard, not to go there. I was a student at Fordham, but I went. They would let you take lessons if you were, good enough to take lessons, which I did. So I took lessons from Mieczysław Munz, who was off the boat from Poland, on how to play Chopin. I mean, that's how much I wanted to do something that would please her, and it wouldn't please her. I remember it just wouldn't please her. There was not, and of course, growing up, it wasn't until I'm sober that I saw she was unpleasable. I always thought it was me. But anyway, that's how I met my husband. When he was playing piano, I was playing piano, and he was a drinker, But what I wanted to share really is, when he was 14 years old, his mother had burned down their home and committed suicide in relation to something he had done. Like, when you get home, I'm not going to be here. And she wasn't, nor was the house. And a few years later, his only brother, who was at MIT, blew out his brains with a gun. My point in sharing this is that in all of New York, that's who I found. That's who I paired up with. And I remember a priest at Fordham said to me something like, Cathy, you should, I came from enough of a lunatic family, but the priest was trying to suggest he might have some problems, and I didn't get it. I thought he was brave, and he was, but he also had some problems, And our marriage, it was just very sad. I can remember having spitting fights with him. He'd spit, I'd spit. So, Jesus. Our neighbors would get out in the hall and listen to our fights because they were so interesting, I guess. I had a neighbor, she used to say, wow, you were spitting at each other? And by then we had moved to Denver. Actually, I followed him. He was an intern at Denver, and I went to graduate school in philosophy. Oh my God. And I was really drinking. I was nowhere near the end of my drinking, but I was really drinking. Like, that phase of my drinking, I can remember things like my sake hangover. I can remember my banana daiquiri hangover. I can see myself laid out on that couch with my head almost, it was bad. It was really bad, and I was never, ever going to do that again. I was never going to drink those banana daiquiris again. I think I didn't drink sake again. I switched. And I remember when in graduate school, going to this party. I passed this exam, and I went to this party, and they had some kind of roast pig, and oh God, I ate the pig, and they had a cauldron with all this stuff, and I barfed all the way home to Denver. That's what my life was about. It was just really that, and that was only a phase. That wasn't even the worst, but that was a phase, and it wouldn't, the only time I had an inkling there might be something wrong. And my husband was just as bad, you know, and plus being a doctor, I mean, you need a Valium, here's a Valium. You need this, here's that, you know. I mean, we'd always be entertaining. Let's have company, let's have a party. Then we'd go downtown, because we were broke, downtown Denver, buy these cases of Sheridan, you know, for the party, for the guests. We would have a couple of, like 2 cases of beer and God knows how much Ripple wine and then little hard stuff, and then the party would always have half a beer, and we'd be drinking, you know, through the night. And I can remember the only time I had an inkling that there was something wrong was we watched Days of Wine and Roses, and I got a crying jag. And somewhere something registered, but it wasn't up here, you know, wasn't up here. So that was kind of the progression of my drinking. And then we moved to California. Actually, we moved to California because our marriage by then was such a shambles, and we went to Art Janoff's Primal Therapy. That was going to save us. Art Janoff's Primal Therapy. And that was wild. I mean, and you couldn't drink, so we didn't drink at first. But then it turned out Art Janoff himself was a psycho, you know, and the place was nuts. And we ended that one by going out and saying, let's go get a bottle of vodka, you know. And anyway, where am I going with this? My husband left. That was scary, you know, and being Catholic, I never even went to court because I was traumatized, and I didn't, so his lawyer took care of everything real well. And I was alone. I had a son. My poor son was born into this lunacy, and I still drank for quite a few years out here, you know, to the point of getting blackouts. But what would always happen would be like, I'd have a blackout and that would scare me. And I can still remember, you know, like the looks on people's faces looking at me. Like my cousin, I can remember them looking like, what is the problem, you know? And I'm getting smashed. I remember getting smashed in the marina, and I remember driving home to Santa Monica, and the next morning I had no recollection how I got there. That was the first time I had a blackout. But then what would happen was I'd get used to having the blackout, you know? So I'd think, okay, you know, I'd get used to having the blackout. I'd get used to it and it wouldn't be so bad. So then I could hang on a little bit longer. But anyway, eventually I got to AA. And I got to AA, I hate admitting this, but if you heard of EST, I did EST in the, you know. And I got involved feeding hungry people, and they had a thing they called the Holiday Project, and they were nice things, but I don't know, EST made me cringe at the same time, but it fit in my Catholic thing, you know. So they had a holiday project where they had volunteers going all over the city and bringing presents at Christmas and Hanukkah, and then developed into other programs. And I was the president of this with like 2,000 volunteers. And what would happen was it accelerated like the problem of my drinking, because I couldn't remember what I told anybody. You know, I'd say, I'm trying to run this project of like 2,000 volunteers, and I couldn't remember, did I do this or did I do that, or did I, and it was getting uncomfortable. You know, I mean, I then knew I had a drinking problem. And there was somebody else who was part of this, who, his name was Robert, and he invited me to a meeting. It's as simple as that. And I decided I'd go to this meeting. And I got to the meeting. It was funny. It was a Pacific Group meeting. And even drunk, I knew there was something wrong. I knew there was something wrong. I mean, I was standing, people throwing confetti phone numbers at me, you know, and I thought, what is this? You know, it was really weird. And it was big. And I remember, you know, because I always cared how I looked. So I was late for everything. I think I got there 5 minutes before the meeting ended, you know, looking great, schnockered. And they were giving out the birthday cakes. And I thought it was someone's birthday. And I had kind of a warm feeling, oh, that's nice. They're friendly. They're they're acknowledging someone's birthday, you know. And when I realized it was for drinking, like a drinking anniversary, not a natal birthday, I really thought like, whoa, these people are, you know, this is really a bit over the top. This is like, this is a little bit cultish, you know, this is weird. I mean, that's just how it struck me, like a little bit too much, just a little bit too much. And that's when I went out with this friend Robert to the Ships at that time was on Wilshire Boulevard. We went to Ships, and somehow in Ships over a cup of coffee, it hit me that I had stooped so low that I was in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got on a crying jag in Ships that was mortifying. You know, I just cried for a couple of hours because I thought, geez, you know, where have I come? A meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Where have I come? And I thought, you know, I decided, well, I'm not really an alcoholic, but this is good information to have because you never know what might happen in the future. I may be an alcoholic in the future if this continues, you know, so it's just good information to have. That this is there, but I don't need it. But it's funny how what had happened at that Pacific Group meeting was I met, to my horror, one of my neighbors that lived in my building. Just who I didn't, and you know, in the Pacific, if it's your first meeting, their eyes light up and they drool and they, oh, we play volleyball, and I go, oh God, you know, please. So I saw this neighbor, and I knew this wasn't for me, but what I noticed over the next couple of months of my drink, I used to have a favorite liquor store. I lived on 10th Street in Santa Monica, 10th in Arizona, and there was a liquor store right down the block, and I'd go there all the time to the liquor store, you know, because I was always running out of liquor. And what began to happen was I didn't want to bump into this, Betty was her name, because I didn't want her to think I was an alcoholic. So I'd keep going down to the liquor, and I you know, got very elaborate, like looking and not wanting to run into her in the elevator and sneaking in the building. And once I bumped into her in the laundry, you know, and she said something, and I said, no, well, you know, I don't think I don't really need it, and you know, yeah. But I asked myself in my sober moments, why am I so uncomfortable about her thinking I might be an alcoholic? Why do I resent that? And it stuck, you know, it stuck. So anyway, I would give up drinking. I would give it up on Christmas. I would give it up on Easter. I finally showed up at AA on June 21st because it was the equinox. So I was going to give it up on the equinox. And then I drank for about another 6 months, and that scared me a little bit because I thought, now you know, I was going to meetings. I was being a good girl. I wasn't connecting. But I'd go to 26 and Broadway. You know, I mean, I'm a flitter. Even now, you know, I have a great way of being friendly, hello, but I'm gone. You know, I'm gone pretty fast, and rather than really connecting. So anyway, I drank for another 6 months, and that scared me a little bit because I thought, gee, now I'm going to AA and I'm still drinking. Maybe I really do have a problem, you know? And when I took those 20 questions, I answered 18 out of 20, the first shot. And the only ones I didn't answer, I still have that in the back of my big book, were something like, did you ever see a physician? Well, why would I see a physician? I didn't have a problem, you know. Were you ever hospitalized? Why would I be hospitalized? I didn't think I had a drinking problem. All the rest of them I answered, you know. And then finally, it's a funny thing, this drinking thing. It's surrender. But, you know, I didn't know I was surrendering. You know, I can't say I really even had the desire to stop drinking. I had the desire to be rid of the effects of drinking. And maybe eventually I had the desire to stop drinking. But I got sober on January 28th, which was the end of my Christmas holiday. And to be honest with you, which I have no other choice really, some of my sober log looked worse than my drunk-a-log, you know? I mean, I was not a person who got sober and I got a 30-day chip and I had God-finding parking spaces and oh, I am just so happy, joyous, and free. I don't know how to contain myself here. And Part of the reason was, who knows the reason? I don't know the reason. But I dated maniacs. Because I was a maniac. I would find the biggest nut. And when I think back, the stuff I did, I mean, oh God, it's really, street corners. I'd come out of it. I had one sponsor say, I can't even sponsor you because this good Catholic girl, it's really, I'd pick on it. And I had no discretion. To give you, I had no discretion. There was a point early in sobriety where I became involved with an astronaut. Not that he was all that well, but he was respectable, and he was a character. I was dating him for a while, and into my life comes this loser, total loser. I'm not even attracted to him, but he's so in love, and he's taking out my son, and he grows on me, and I get rid of the astronaut for this loser. And I got involved with him, and that was a disaster. And the disaster was that I became pregnant with him. I hate sharing this even. I really hate sharing it. But it's what comes to my mind to share, and it was a long detour because the loser, who was so madly in love with me, was gone, I've since found out he has God knows how many cases before and after in the DA's office, and as I shared with you, he's marching around, guess where, the Pacific Group, shaking hands and smiling, but I can make light of that, but being pregnant, and the most hurtful part was that I had believed him. I had believed him. And it was just the most painful time of my life. It was the most painful time of my life. And I even had to dissociate from the program because, we all mean well, but my sponsor will always say, you share your experience, strength, and hope. And sometimes she'll say to me like, well, I'm sorry, dear, I haven't had that experience. And I think, well, have it. Tell me what to do. Give me your opinion. But I believe what she has taught me of sharing your experience, strength, and hope. However, I noticed that we like to give our opinions, And all during that, like I can remember one man who was a big-time speaker, and I even liked him, but he'd say, oh, what's the problem? Write a grateful list. You're a mother. I'm thinking, were you ever pregnant and the guy left you? Do you, and so it was hard because when I would share, then people would say things I couldn't, just made it worse. I would just feel worse. But I even at that time, I will admit, I was 2 years sober, and I thought that was long-term sobriety. I thought that was long-term, like 2 years. And when I was 9 months pregnant, something happened with him that was just, and plus my family, they couldn't handle this. And I had to be hospitalized in the nut house. I lost all my babies. It's hard to sponsor people from the insane asylum, It was just so, but when I got there though, then the doctor said, there's nothing wrong with you, you're not crazy. This is just very painful. And it was very painful, it was just something. And that, it affected my whole life from there, even though I have a beautiful daughter and I have it's been a hard road. So, and let me share program-wise too, it's been hard to deal with the issue of forgiveness. Forgiveness is real easy, as a concept. But in the practical, it's been a real blockbuster for me, I would think, and I think too much. I mean, I went to graduate school in philosophy, so I just wear myself out, I interview people, like, how did you forgive me? And I go to people, I don't go, but I've had a couple of friends on the program, and they are test cases for me one had her son murdered, her 8th birthday, AA birthday. Her son was murdered. I know another one like that. And I would think, you know, after a long time, I think, well, how do you deal with that? I mean, are you supposed to go pray for the murderer, you know? Do you get raped and go say, let's have a cup of coffee and I wish you all the happiness in the world, you know? I mean, there's still things that I struggle with, you know, as far as, I mean, I can let go and I can turn it over to God and I can, you know, do God's will and all that. But I get stuck on actually, it's the rule thing, I think, like, oh, you're supposed to pray for them to have everything, you know, and I don't know. You know, I don't know. All I know is my experiences. I've had trouble with that when it's been, you know, serious things. Now, let me see. This isn't too funny, all this. Let's see. What do I want to share with you? Well, work pops in my mind. You know, I remember hearing early on, like, just show up, suit up and show up and smile and change your attitude. And that wasn't always the case for me, you know. I mean, I got some really flunky jobs, working for some real idiots, and I noticed it was different when I got better jobs. You know, even though I was not doing the program right, because I was just supposed to show up, suit up, and smile and change my attitude, and everything was going to be hunky-dory in these loser jobs, it didn't happen. But as time went on, I got better jobs, and I just felt more self-respect, you know. Although I had some personality problems in the jobs. I went to work actually back in, my undergraduate studies were in chemistry. And that's a part of my upbringing that I didn't bring up either. You know, where I grew up in New York, it was like a handicap for a girl to be smart. I mean, you weren't supposed to be smart. You're supposed to be shorter than the guy, you know, dumber than the guy. I mean, and I went to Fordham, which was all men at the time I went there. You would just, so it felt like there was something wrong with me. You know, I was very good in math and physics and all this stuff, and it felt like there was something wrong with me. Well, anyway, when I got sober, then I, somehow or other, I got a job working in forensics at the crime lab. And I had taken another course just to see if anything was still working up there. And I got this job, and I thought, that's gotta be, you know, a miracle, because I haven't been in chemistry for 20 years. When am I supposed to finish this thing? Oh, okay. And I got that job, and that was an interesting job. You know, I became a narcotics expert and going to court, but working for that mentality of the sheriff's department was really hell. You know, really, really. I mean, you read about it now with some of this, and especially if you were a woman. Like, I remember my daughter had very bad asthma, and I can remember her school calling and saying, your daughter can't breathe, you know. So I'd have to go take her to the doctor, and I would always get written up, you know, like you get written up. And this would happen very infrequently. And then I'd say, well, how come I'm written up and every week the guys can go play basketball, and they'd announce it over the crime lab speakers, you know, softball practice starts in 5 minutes, and they all go play. And saying that made them think I was like a communist feminist or something, you know. And it made for very hard times. So anyway, I'm not there anymore. They about tortured me out. But what I did the last couple of years, and I really put myself out on a limb. I don't know if this is crazy or what, but I felt like it is what I was supposed to do. I've always wanted to write, but I never had the guts to stick to it. So I'd write things, put them in a drawer, write things, put them in, wrote a play, put it in a drawer. And I thought, I'm not getting any younger. I want to do this. So I wrote, and I just finished it actually on the computer. When the computers were the Y2K, I remember printing this thing out of there because I thought my computer was going to blow up on New Year's Eve. And I wrote this whole novel about being a single mother working in the crime lab and corruption and this. And I thought, well, this is, and I've written other things, but I've sent it off now, and all I get is notices saying, sorry, we don't accept unsolicited material, And I'm a little scared because I'm thinking, maybe I wasn't supposed to do this. Maybe that's self-will. Maybe, who knows? But I'm trying more to just live one day at a time and do what I think I'm supposed to be doing. I pray. In fact, recently I've been reading, which I never read, was Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. If you haven't read that, I didn't even know. Now, I'm 19 and a half years sober, and I didn't even know when someone said Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, I thought it was in the big book. I'm thinking, where is this in the big book? I didn't know it was a separate book. And I bought this book, and it's fabulous. I mean, it is so moving. I used to think there were like two people who founded AA in Akron, and one helped the other, but there were so many more people involved, these doctors and clergy people, who put their hearts and guts, and it really didn't just happen, and it's very moving, the account. And it's helped me because despite all my Jesuit stuff, I've had a difficult time with the higher power and all this business and in my head, and it gives you the roots of the program, surrender and the concepts and the notion of pick a higher power. There used to be a guy, Leon, he'd always say, grab you any old higher power, grab the doorknob, and you think of the doorknob or the ocean or whatever. And this book it's just a good experience to read it in the morning. I read a little bit of it, and I write a little bit, and I act as if I make up, and maybe I'll finish with this, is, shedding that Catholic God is not very easy. It was a heck of a God, It was a heck of a God, and plus, if you didn't believe according to the Catholic Church, you go straight to hell. And in hell, I read all the saints' books where they plucked out their eyes and all, and they'd have snakes and bubbling waters and so internally, it was very hard to give up this notion of God. But one day at a time, what I find myself doing right now is getting in touch with a comfortable notion of God and believing that I'm being directed for the good of my children and myself and, whatever. And just doing what's in front of me. Sometimes my sponsor will just say, don't figure it out, just do what's in front of you. And I could do a better job with my sponsor too, I have to admit. I say my sponsor, but my sponsor is one of these like fantastic, super well-known celebrity sponsors, and she's so important that I'm always afraid to call her, So I rarely talk to her, but I like what she says when I talk to her, And let me see how I want to finish this up. Just, I guess, how I started. I'm glad to be here. I'm grateful to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm grateful to be able to go anywhere. When I go back to New York at times, I meet friends. My son, I feel sorry for my son because he has all these problems from growing up with these maniacs, me and his father. And he would express jealousy. He would say, you can go anywhere and go to a meeting, And he just has his demons. But he doesn't drink yet anyway at this point, but it's true, I can go anywhere and I do, and I have meetings and I meet people and I go out to breakfast and much more important than that, I have a way to, that's experience, strength, and hope. I have a way to get through the hard times and believe, not just hope, believe that my life is on the right path and that God is leading me to good things. So thank you for having me here. That's it.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.